Hello and welcome to the Female Executive Survival Guide podcast. I'm Lauren Eyles, an executive coach and mentor with a ton of leadership and board experience to share. Leadership can be lonely, so I'm here to introduce you to amazing leaders so you can learn from us and get to where you want to be quicker. Welcome. Today we'll be talking about reinvention, what it's like to leave an executive role behind. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that this is being recorded on the lands of the Awabakal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sometimes we climb the career ladder, get to the top and realise that it's against the wrong wall. It takes a lot of courage to admit this to ourselves and even more to change direction for our own health and happiness. I've lived this and I also coach people through it. So I was delighted to read an article in The Guardian about a new book by an English author, Kathy Slack. Kathy's book is called Rough Patch: How a Year in the Garden Brought Me Back to Life. It's a fabulous memoir with a lot of delicious recipes thrown in, and it explores Kathy's journey from the dizzying heights of being a global strategy director in a London advertising agency through the bumpiness of burnout and depression and finding rejuvenation in nature and coming home to herself. I really enjoyed it. I read it all in one sitting. It's so well written. And I think reinvention is something that we can all relate to. And I really think, I don't know what Kathy thinks about this similarity because I haven't asked her yet, but I think it could be the eat, pray, love of our time in terms of that universal connection around journey and human experience. She's smiling, so I think that's a good thing. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you very much for having me. And you know, if it sold 1,000th of what that book did, I would be extremely happy. So I will take that comparison and keep my fingers crossed.
I'm going to jump on Amazon afterwards and write you a review with that wording and see if it takes off.
Yes, please.
I think many women will find connection and nourishment in your story. And I'd love to hear, what was your motivation for writing it?
Honestly, it was quite selfish, really, because I had been through this experience of a very acute and critical phase of depression that led me to leave work in about 2012, 2013. And in about 2019, 2020-ish, I suppose, my agent said, I feel like there's a story here. And I thought, really? It's just a middle-aged woman crying on the kitchen floor. I'm not sure there's lots to tell. But as I dug into it, I started to think, gosh, this is, from a totally selfish point of view, really interesting to me to work out what happened, because I was so in the thick of these incredibly intense emotions and physical manifestations of those that I hadn't really sat down and thought about what had happened. And something about it needed, in a way, retelling in my own mind so that I could see it as a positive, so that I could realise how far I'd come, so that all those ideas that I'd had that had helped me get better, which are so ephemeral and kind of fleeting and really susceptible to being drowned out by the noise of every day, were kind of written down somewhere, so that when I got caught up in the treacle again, I knew I had sort of reference notes, if you like, to go back to. So at first it was just self-indulgence, really.
I love that it helps you make sense of a particular chapter and also help you make that bridge into the next thing for you.
Exactly that, yeah.
I loved how strong a theme nature was throughout the book and the different characters that came out in the plants and the creatures. And I know from a writing technique that takes a lot of mastery and work and time to bring that to life. What were some of the biggest learnings that you had from nature?
Yes, well, as you say, nature was really central to me recovering from depression. And I say recovering, but I think it's really important to be realistic about it. You know, I think anyone who's been there will know that it leaves a scar, it leaves a trace. In fact, I would argue that it's never really cured, quote unquote. but nature was really an instrumental therapy for me, if you like. But not just nature, because we all know that going out for a walk is good for your mental health, or connecting with a beautiful view and things like that are really good for you. But for me, it was growing vegetables that was tangibly different from those other ways of reconnecting with nature, because it gave me agency and it gave me a sense of hope, because every seed you sow is a little act of hope, a little promise to the future that there'll be dinner on the table soon. And so nature was instrumental in kind of reconnecting me with the world and with the food on my plate, and I found a lot of creativity there as well. And I found it very calming being in the veg patch. At first, it gave me comfort and solace and a quiet, safe space to work out what was going on in my head. And actually, it sort of quietened the cacophony that came with depression, which I know for a lot of people, you feel it's just about sadness. And it was, there was a lot of sadness, but also there was just such hecticness in my brain and such chatter. And in the veg patch, I found that just sort of quietened a little bit, and I could see which way was up, and that became my, at first, my solace. And then later, once I'd tried to go back to my old corner office and board job, disastrously, for the full grisly tale, see the work, it didn't offer solace. Instead, it kind of offered a sort of inspiration, a bit of a challenge, a bit of a, what are you going to do with this creativity and all these harvests that you're getting? And maybe you should write something, maybe you should write some recipes, and maybe there's a whole new career path here. So it was inspiring. That's the word I'm groping for. It was inspiring as well.
Amazing. I've heard a few beautiful themes there around creativity, connection, and calm. And I think the world we're living in, even our mobile devices and things, and how that's played a part in our careers in the last couple of decades, we're all absolutely aching for those three things.
I know. And I feel in a way that I missed the worst of that, because I left my corporate job in advertising in by 2013, I was gone. And so we still have Blackberries. The Apple phone was there, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And we knew that social media marketing was going to be very big one day, but it wasn't. We didn't live our lives through it then.
Yeah.
So it was a different time even then.
You did weather the global financial crisis. I can remember coming to London just after that. So I think you did it tough in your own way.
Yes, it was different kind of tough, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. You described climbing the career ladder, getting to the top of your profession and looking around and realising that this job and industry isn't for me, and then the guilt and the self-imposed pressure that followed. What would you say to a woman who's at a similar career crossroads?
Do you know, I'm really hesitant to offer advice, because from my experience, when you're in the thick of it and you've, if you're like me, had totally drunk the Kool-Aid and couldn't see what was important, what wasn't important, having somebody say to you, what's really important is A, B, and C would have been no use, because I would have been like, no, as I was when the doctor said to me, I'm signing you off work, you've got severe depression. My response was, no, you can't possibly do that. I've got to give a PowerPoint presentation this afternoon about the Hungarian snacking habits of teenage boys in Hungary, and I thought that was that's much more important than the fact the doctors told me I'm quite critically poorly at the moment, And so I'm hesitant to offer advice, but what I would try and do is give that person space and time and quiet to work out, just to sort of go a bit cold turkey in a way. And kind of, it's so rare for us to be faced with ourselves without any interference, that I think if you can give that somebody that gift, then it gives you a chance to work out who you really are once you remove all of the trappings that we get so caught up in.
And it's a bit like the frog in the boiling water, isn't it? Whether it's the pace of a job or an industry or even the corporate culture, that you just don't notice the temperature rising because we're programmed to match and mirror and connect and groupthink and all of that. So it can happen quite quickly in a way that someone might be thinking, oh, this part isn't for me, but you get more and more caught up in it until you're at a point where you're like, actually, no, there's more. I'm here to do different things.
Exactly. In a way, I mean, you wouldn't wish a breakdown on your worst enemy, but in a way, it had its uses for me, because I would never have been brave enough to look at my situation and go, this isn't healthy for me, I need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
That my hand was forced was probably a good thing in the end.
You're meant for other things. And I'm so excited that you're well and truly into that chapter. There was a chapter in the book where you talked about flying from London to New York for a 15-minute meeting with a senior colleague who loses his, let's just say, cool. And then you fly home overnight so you can make it back to the office for a 9 o'clock meeting. And you described how this was off the back of 14-hour days and a daily 4-hour commute. When I read about this without being immersed in the story like you're living it, I think, there's no psychological safety. You're working through a dog-eat-dog culture. You're working yourself into the ground. And I think the environment's broken, not the person. Do you look at this differently now?
I am amazed that I look back at the things that were considered necessary then and didn't think, this is absurd. Like, there was another instance where I moved a holiday, a family holiday to Canada, and I moved it, or one bit of it, or I got there late because my colleague wanted me in a meeting in New York with him, and it was a 2-hour meeting, and it cost thousands of pounds to move this, and it was just hand holding. That's all it was, and it wasn't necessary. I mean, nothing like that's necessary, really, is it? But and what I find interesting about your question as well is that it's not that any of the people who were expecting me to do those things were bad or neglectful people. Actually, I mean, apart from possibly the boss who gave me an absolute rollicking when I went to his New York office, apart from him, they were, by and large, kind, smart, in fact, incredibly smart people who had... I don't know how it happened to us all, but it was like we were sort of slightly brainwashed by it. Brainwashed is probably not a fair phrase because that makes it sound cultish, and we all went into it with our eyes open. We all knew that we were being paid very well to work very hard, and that was fine because it afforded a lifestyle. And I don't think anyone would have said that they felt pressured into doing any of those things. It's just what needed to be done, or what we felt needed to be done, perhaps is a better way of putting it.
And how those norms are developed over time. I've been doing some writing myself, and I was thinking about a situation where I was heading up communications for a big asset, and there was a fair bit of after-hours media, and I was at my brother and sister-in-law's house for my eldest niece's 3rd birthday, and I ended up getting this media call about 2 tugboat companies changing ownership, and I'm sitting on the carpet in the parents' bedroom doing this conference call and writing the story, and I remember my little niece toddling up 7 o'clock at night on a weeknight and going, how long will you be, Auntie Lauren? Just a few minutes. And so she's toddling back up to the rest of the family going, she'll just be a few minutes. And at the time I felt kind of proud, like, I'm such a great role model and this career person. And I look back now more than 10 years later and I think it's actually a bit sad, because what would have happened? Like, yes, you got to be on call for emergencies, but are all these things really emergencies? What would happen if you didn't answer the call? And yes, you'd get in a lot of trouble because you're getting paid to do it. But I think we've got to start looking a bit smarter as leaders throughout business about we can do everything 24/7, but it's not sustainable. What is really an emergency? Because every time we spring into action, we're burning a bit more cortisol. We're back on. We've disrupted our rest and relax state. We've disrupted our connections with the people that matter most. And as I've left some of those big jobs on really good terms, how many people am I actually deeply connected with all those years later? So it's been those notice periods that when you've worked yourself into the ground and for years and years and years, those notice periods remind you that you're a resource, you're replaceable.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The way you're talking reminds me of a talk I saw given by an amazing female creative director years and years ago, and she showed a picture of her holiday, a recent and then the creative work she sold immediately after that holiday, and it's all her best work. And she managed to draw a parallel between the holiday she'd been on and the piece of work that she created after that, making the point that rest is good for your creativity and important for you to be able to do these hard and demanding jobs. But now I think that's quite an interesting discussion, because it makes me wonder, it's very easy to say, oh, well, I must rest because it'll make me more efficient at work. No, you must rest because we aren't meant to work the whole time. Not because you'll be more productive if you do rest. You're just meant to rest. That's okay. So it's or meant to take time off to be with your family or whatever it is. So it's difficult to keep perspective, isn't it?
So true. I'm not as green as you are, unfortunately. I'm good at keeping a dog healthy and happy, but I'm just working on the houseplants. But I have this peace lily in the bathroom, and she gets so droopy if she's upset. Like, you've got to give it water or she droops very fast. And I think maybe we need to have that litmus test with ourselves to understand where we're flagging, where we need water and rest, and really put that back in balance a bit more.
Yeah, that's when you've worked out how to do that. Will you let me know? Because I need some too.
Another interesting point in the book was you wrote that burnout was so predictable. In hindsight, I had been stressed for a decade and jet lagged solidly for a year. Do you remember any of the early warning signs that you were testing those human limits?
Yes, but I didn't see them for what they were. I look back now and I go, all these little things, and I write about this a lot in Rough Patch, that all these things that change about the way you are seem so small because they happen very gradually over time. And then suddenly, and then in 18 months, you look back and you realise that you can't recognise yourself anymore. So, for example, at first, you start a few nights of maybe not sleeping particularly well, and then you take a couple of like herbal sleeping pills or something, and then you start taking them every night, and then that just becomes who you are. You're a light sleeper, I need a bit of help to go to sleep. Or you don't have lunch one day because you're working too hard, and then somebody offers to go and get lunch for you, and then they do it again the following day, your secretary or something, and then suddenly you maybe don't bother to have lunch, or if you do, only if somebody else goes out and gets it for you, so you never leave the office from 8 till 8. Or you're a bit worried about something, and then you start realizing that you're worried about quite a lot of things, and then over the period of a couple of months you've just become quite an anxious person. And so because it creeps up on you, or for me anyway, it crept up on me so much that you don't really notice the erosion of your identity until it's all gone and it's too late, which makes it particularly difficult. And I think people often think about burnout and breakdowns as being a sort of dramatic plot point that has to happen in a really big meeting and has to involve somebody flouncing out of a meeting, throwing papers in the air or something, or shouting at their boss or something inappropriate. And that's just not how it was for me. It was much blander than that, but dulling in a much more, I think, dangerous way.
It's one of those things that we get so immersed in the worlds that we're working in and technology now that I think a lot of us are losing that connection to our breathing, to our sort of our state, how relaxed we are. Even the movement, I notice how easy it is to not move, to just be sitting and in meetings and on phones and asleep on the lounge. It's like I love the connection to nature and the rhythms of nature that you connected with, because that's a really healthy way of drawing ourselves back out of tech and into connection with ourselves, as your book is about.
And it kind of reminds you that you're just another creature like the bugs in the... Oh, I hesitate to say bugs to an Australian audience because your bugs are quite frightening. I mean, like little insects, inconsequential insects, or the birds, or whatever it is. Because you're right. It's and for me, seeing a seed germinate and become supper, become something that I can eat, watching the land create food, is a way of reminding myself that I am just another one of these beings that's part of the world, and that's all that really matters. Everything else is constructed by the incredible thing that is human civilization, but it's still constructed. And I should caveat all of that with, I am so allergic to hippie woo nonsense. It's so unlike me. But I do feel like I'm sort of reminded of the creature that I am, and it in a way that makes me look up and go, oh, this is what's real when I'm surrounded by nature, which is really easy to forget when you're in the thick of Zoom and Slack and other, all those other things that sort of productize our time.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was interesting how you talked about worrying about what the sisterhood of generations past who fought for all the freedoms that we have today would think about your choice to leave the big job and the glitzy industry. I really think they'd be proud of you. I mean, you used your agency and freedom to prioritise your health and happiness. What do you think they'd say now?
I really struggle with this now, and that was a really difficult bit to write in the book. I mean, a brilliant friend of mine, when I've told her my angst about this, who's a very well-read feminist, said to me, "Sweetheart, the sisterhood is not watching. They've got their own problems right now," which I thought was a really good point. But I think what it is that makes me question the feminism of it all, however you define that, is that the only reason I could do any of this, like give up a well-paid job and go and do something quite risky, was because I don't have children by choice, and because I have a husband who had a stable income, so we knew we could pay the mortgage. So I got to take the risk. And I feel like sometimes, particularly when it's a creative job that you do as a freelancer for yourself and you are female, it can sometimes, certainly out here in rural England, sometimes be seen as a bit of a plaything. Like, it's not a real job. She doesn't really need to do it. She's just sort of having a bit of a go, and it's a bit of a vanity project, and that really makes my blood boil. But might be a worry that I create myself rather than a real one. I don't know.
We can be the hardest critics on ourselves, can't we? And yes, say things to ourselves we wouldn't even think about an acquaintance, let alone say.
I know completely. Yeah. And I do. And I am often, the old saying that the patriarchy is within, I think is definitely true with me.
The bully can be within too, can't it, for all of us?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's amazing the transferable skills that we develop throughout our careers, that even when we change career, it's not lost. All the things you've built and earned in yourself, they go with you. Regardless of how similar or different the job and the industry is, the creativity, the ability to understand how things are connected, business strategy, leading people, leading yourself. How is that playing out for you? What sort of things are you doing now?
Yeah, enormously beneficial. I think, well, my old job in advertising used to be brand strategy. And so my job was to find one single, this was the hard bit, message that would communicate the product in a way that would make consumers want to, a particular set of consumers want to buy it. And that ability to really hone down to the single most important thing to say has been so useful in writing book proposals, in writing at all, because you're trying to make it, particularly non-fiction, when you're trying to make a point, but also in the way you communicate. I mean, not now because we're chatting nicely on a podcast and I can ramble slightly, but ordinarily. So that's been incredibly useful to sort of sift through all the other unnecessary stuff and just focus on the one thing that I want to be about, or I want to say, or I want to write about. But also, unbelievably, it's maybe 25, goodness me, years since I graduated with my theatre studies degree. To my parents are very supportive, but I'm sure there was a little bit of them that went, theatre studies, really, darling? Finally, 25 years later, it becomes useful because I did the audio narration for the audiobook of Rough Patch, and it was so nice to be able to go, oh wait, hang on a minute, I used to be in theatre, I can do this. It's absurd. It finally paid off. So but also with presenting and things like that, you know, if you're doing cookery demos or food festivals or workshops and things like that, it's nice to, you know, these are skills that just become a sort of muscle, don't they, from presenting to boards or whatever it is.
Absolutely. The self-leadership, how it all weaves together. Yeah.
But I think that's a good point as well, that certainly in book publishing at the moment, authors have to be their own PR and their own marketeers and their own editors and their own videographers and their own social media managers. And, you know, unless you're very starry, you basically have to do it all yourself and find your own fuel and energy to do it, but also the skills to do it as well. So I think having grown up in that world of marketing and advertising was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, well, I can definitely tell the book's written by someone who's been a professional communicator, because it has that beautiful, the audience is at the centre. Even though it's your very personal story, you're writing it in a way that it's connecting with the reader at every point. And I just dipping my toe into the writing pool at the moment. I'm like, that is not an easy thing to do. So well done.
Oh, thank you. I'm really glad you noticed that. I'd not thought about it that way before, but yeah, you're right. I think particularly when you're writing a book that is all about your experience, I feel like it would be, I was very worried about it being sort of misery porn and very self-indulgent and, you know, and so I've kept it quite funny and quite focused on the reader, as you say, so that, like, you want to be of service to the people who read it, don't you?
Absolutely. And there's a real strong thread of hope that comes through, and the humanity of it. And I think everyone can connect to that in their own way. If you had your time over again, is there anything you do differently?
This is such a difficult question. I mean, I'd like to have managed to get where I got to without having to have the really difficult bit in the middle, if that would be all right. I wish I hadn't got myself into such a pickle that it put my family and my husband and my friends through such a tough time. Though I feel like at the end of it, good things came out of it. But I would like to have managed to get there without it being quite such drama for them, I think.
Wouldn't we all love to not be human? It's so
Yes,
hard,
exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And what's your survival tip for a woman who's just starting out as an executive?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and it depends on the sort of person you are. I think if you can remind yourself, if you can be your own cheerleader, I suppose is the thing I want to say. If you can promote that voice in your head that goes, that was pretty good, nicely done, rather than the voice in your head that goes, I think you could have done that a bit better. Do they think you could have done that a bit better? If you can promote the cheerleader rather than the critic, then you will do very well. But also, and maybe this helps quieten the critic a bit, people are not thinking about you as much as you worry they are.
So
true. It's probably fine. And I wish I'd realised that sooner, particularly when you're trying to cut your teeth and you're trying to get ahead and all of these kinds of things. You do worry that everyone's sort of, everyone else is their own main character, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Not you. So don't worry as much as you might about it.
Great advice. And I think they're probably having a wrestle with their own inner critic, just when we're wrestling with ours.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, that has been a revelation to me, a really recent one. You'd think I'd have got to, I'm 46, you'd think I'd have worked it out sooner, and it only came from writing this book, that actually the relief on people's face when you are honest with them about, yeah, this is really tough, isn't it? Or I don't actually know what I'm doing. Do you? The number of times people go, oh God, no, neither do I. Or we're just making it up. Or yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. And suddenly you're friends and the world changes and everything's much easier. So most people don't know what they're doing either as well.
Absolutely. We're all doing our best, figuring it out and growing and evolving throughout our lifetime. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a brilliant conversation, and I know that your story is going to reach and help a lot of people, not only women, but I think there's a lot of men that will be on similar journeys. And we'll pop notes to the book, Rough Patch, in the show notes, and also your social media so people can connect with you.
Please do. Yes, it's been a pleasure to chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you're inspired by that conversation with Kathy, please let me know. And if you're looking for a coach or mentor to help you thrive at work, you can find me at laureneyles.com.au. Until next time. Thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded on a Awabakal country on Australia's east coast. All advice is general in nature. If you liked this podcast, please like, rate and share. You can connect with me at laureneyles.com.au.